Okay, hey guys. The next part of the lesson is going to be about the Holocaust. And I don't just want to talk about it quickly. I have a timeline that I'm going to go over with you. And the Holocaust is something that I do take very seriously, and because it was a horrific event that actually happened. And this is something that we need to learn so it doesn't repeat itself. Like the saying goes, we don't, history will repeat itself, and this is something that we don't want to happen. So I'm going to go to another PowerPoint. This is called The History of the Holocaust. The Holocaust went through about 1933 until 1947. So over a span of 14 years, you had this devastating event going on, all because one man wanted to come to power. Now, before we get into it, you need to understand what a Holocaust is. Okay, the definition officially of a Holocaust is it's a noun. It is the destruction or slaughter on a mass scale. So that means getting rid of something in large quantities, almost as you would call it now a genocide. The Holocaust was a systematic, bureaucratic, state sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Now, there's a lot of big words. So let's look. You have systematic, which means it was a system. They had methods to which they did everything. Bureaucratic means government. State sponsored, that would be the state of Germany or any other state that sponsored this persecution, is to go after someone. Murder of not just Jewish people, but it's over 6 million Jews, 1 million of which were children, by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. The Holocaust is a word of Greek origin meaning sacrifice by fire. The Nazis, who came to power in Germany in January of 1933, believed that Germans were radically superior and that the Jews were deemed inferior, which means below them. They were an alien threat to the so called German radical community. And this was all the belief that Adolf Hitler brainwashed these people into believing that if you fit into a certain mold, for him, the certain mold was blonde, blue-eyed, or light shaded eyes. You were what they would call the Aryan race. You were the perfect race. You were the race that everyone wanted to be, which is ironic because he himself was a dark-haired, dark-eyed man. So I never really understood that. But if you were German, just like nationalism, you were the best of the best. And because Germany was blamed for the loss of World War One. And if Hitler wanted the Germans to feel good about themselves, he needed to cast blame onto someone else. And his answer to that was to cast blame on the Jewish community of the area. So that's exactly what he did. So in 1933, the Nazi Party takes power in Germany. Adolf Hitler becomes chancellor or prime minister of Germany. Nazis temporarily, that means for a little bit, suspend civil liberties of the Jewish people. Now, in 1933, the Nazis set up the first concentration camp, and we're going to talk a little more about concentration camps here in a little bit, in Dachau. Now, the first inmates were 200 communists. Now, the communists may have come from the USSR or other places like that. Now, civil liberties are basically everything that we can do based on our government rights. Walking, talking on church, being able to meet printing paper and reading it and sending it to people. Those were little liberties that the Germans were taking, not the Germans, but the Nazi party was taking away from a certain group, the Jewish people. Now, one of the big things that he did was Hitler was afraid of any other outside ideas. So what he did is he went in the Nazi party, got all books that he himself considered dangerous to Nazi beliefs, and they basically had a book burning party where thousands of books were burned because they went against what Hitler was preaching to his followers. Now, also during this time is when Hitler began his anti Jewish, or it's called anti Semitic, policies. And these policies prevented the Jewish people from doing things that they've been allowed to do for years. Now, this is a picture of Dachau. It was, like I said, the first concentration camp. And basically, a concentration camp is a place where people are taken. It can either be in the form of a work camp where they work, or it can be in the form, unfortunately, of what they refer to as a death camp, where if you went there, you were surely guaranteed to die. This right here is a picture of rules that were set just for the Jewish people. Now, if you look closely, you can see these images, and this type of propaganda information right here were to give the Jews a disfiguring look and to give them a look of disgust, because that's how Hitler wanted all these people to feel about the Jewish people. Now, this right here is a photograph of the books that were being burned. The books and writings deemed un-German were burned at the Oppenplatz. Okay, I didn't take German, I took French. Oppenplatz, which was in Berlin, Germany, May 10th, 1933. Now, this comes from the National Archives and Records in College Park. So as you can see, you have the officers that are dressed up, and you have the other citizens who are making the Nazi salute, which is not a good thing to do. So if you ever see anyone do it, tell them to stop, try to explain it to them. It's not something that you do just to do it. It's a very disparaging thing. Now, in 1934, Hitler combines the position of Chancellor and President to become Führer, or leader of Germany. So he didn't want anyone else to question his authority or to come close to coming into power. So he created his own position, which was Führer. Jewish newspapers could no longer be sold in the streets. And Hitler purged the Nazi parties of those he distrusted. And this is what he called the Night of the Long Knives. That is when he actually had people in his own party that he thought that could come in or stand in his way of becoming powerful, or who were trying to stop him. He had them murdered, and it was referred to as the Night of Long Knives. And I believe during that night he was giving a speech when all this stuff was going on. Now, this is a picture of Adolf Hitler when he was coming into power. And beside him was the leader of Germany, who was going, he was losing his mind, if I've read correctly. So he easily pushed him out of power. Now, the Knickerbocker Press down here, it says Hitler executes 7, crushing revolt. That was the result of the Night of the Long Knives, where he had people murder the 7 people who were, in his opinion, were trying to overthrow his party. Now, in 1935, the Jews are deprived of their citizenship and other basic rights. These are called the Nuremberg Laws. The Nazis intensify the persecution of political people that don't agree with his, when I say his, I mean Adolf Hitler's philosophy. So you have in 1933, you have basic civil liberties are being taken away. And in 34, you have other things being taken. And then now you have in 35, where you have their actual citizenship. They're being deprived of that and other rights. And people are being persecuted because they believe differently than what Adolf Hitler is telling people to believe. So during this time, also, you had many signs on businesses that looked very similar to this right here on the left. It basically reads, Jews are unwanted here. They didn't want them to come in. And on the right, you have the Star of David, which says Jew. All Jews were required to wear the Star of David on the outside of their clothing. If they were caught without it, they could get in serious trouble. Also, part of the Nuremberg laws was basically everyone had to track their birth lineage, because if you had so much of the Jewish blood, they believed, in your system, you were considered a Jew and basically unwanted in Germany. So many people had to prove whether or not they in fact had any any Jewish relations or not. And they took these laws very serious. And so you have Jews that are unwanted in many places. You have them now having to wear a Star of David on the outside of their clothing, adults and children. And then they had to prove their lineage of family. Okay, in 1936, this is when the Nazis are starting to boycott Jewish-owned businesses. Basically, they would have the Nazi soldiers stand outside any Jewish-owned business and tell people not to come in. And also during 1936, it just so happened to be a year of the Olympics, the Summer Olympics, in fact. And before, Hitler came into power, Germany was already, or Berlin, was already picked to host the Olympic Games that summer. So Hitler did not want to give anyone outside of Germany the a visual of life is not great in Germany. So anything that was derogatory, anything that was, in fact, when anything against the Jewish people, Hitler took down. He made Berlin look like it was the best place to be. This new political party of his was great. It's going to revolutionize the world. That only stayed like that while the Olympics were going on. Nothing after the Olympics left, everything went back to normal. Also in 1936, Hitler took the Jewish people's right to vote away from them. And why he did this is because when you do not have the right to vote, you cannot give an opinion on what you think needs to happen. When you're given the right to vote, you are given the right to make change, if possible. So if the Jews were allowed to vote, then they could vote different people into the office, which would go against Adolf Hitler's his beliefs. So he didn't want that. So one quick way to squash that is to just get away with the voting, just period. Now, many people, when we get down here, wanted. I'm sorry, let me get this real quick. As you can see right here, Jewish business, and the soldier is standing outside of it. And then here is the 36 Olympics. Now, many people, some did not want to go to the Olympics because they had heard rumors about what was going on in Berlin at the time. And one of those people is right here is Jesse Owens, who in fact came back a major winner during these Olympic Games. He won many races. And what Hitler actually brought to the Olympic Games was this gravitas, this celebration. He was actually responsible for like what the opening Olympics look like today, the ceremony. So he wanted everything to be a show, and a show it was. Now, and we're going to skip to 1938. German troops annexed Austria, which meant they took it. Now, Kristallnacht, which is the Night of Broken Glass, that is when Nazis terrorized. They went through Germany, they went through Austria, which they had annexed and taken part of. They went through and destroyed synagogues, which were Jewish places of worship, businesses, homes. They had 30,000 Jews arrested. They were just going wild with this. It was called Kristallnacht. So they didn't want, they just wanted to basically knock the Jews down as far as they could go. The Jews also had to carry an ID card and a new Jewish passport. They took the other passport away from them that was marked with a J, which meant they were Jewish. Jews could no longer be heads of businesses, attend plays, have concerts. The German children could no longer go to school. They couldn't sell business or hand own. They really couldn't own anything or sell anything. All Jewish business had to shut down. That meant that they took their money. They didn't have money. They couldn't go anywhere. The Germans took away their driving license and their car registrations. So they couldn't leave. If they needed to, they had to walk everywhere, and they couldn't get away fast. And the Jews also were under strict orders of where they could go and what time they could do it in. And this was getting closer and closer towards when Adolf Hitler was going to start by invading Poland, the Second World War. So here's some images of Kristallnacht. This is a synagogue that was burned. And you have businesses where the front of the stores are, the glass is broken, things are destroyed. They would do this and throw torches and burn uh, all these businesses, which was a terrible thing. And this was only the beginning. Now, in 1939, Germany takes over a small area known as Czechoslovakia, and then it invades Poland. Now, that was the tipping point for World War II. Because of their invasion and because of the alliance that Poland had with France and Great Britain, those two countries declared war on Germany. And this is what Hitler wanted. Now, Hitler also created what was called a ghetto, which were basically like apartments that families had to cram into, and they would have multiple families per apartment. And these were all for the Jews in a certain area of town. One of the most famous was called Warsaw. And like I said, Hitler, they had to follow a strict curfew. They were no longer allowed to hold or have radios. And radios is where they got their news from. And if you don't know what's going on, it's very hard to understand how everything's moving and how the things are playing out. And Jews were required now to start wearing that Star of David that I showed you earlier. So here are pictures of some ghettos. So it's distinguished by the Star of David and the sign. And basically, they could not go past these fences if it was a certain time of day or time of the day. These were Jewish people leaving the ghettos and getting onto different carts and things to go probably to a concentration camp. And children and adults alike were starving in these ghettos. And if they didn't die in the ghetto, then there was a likelihood that they would either die on a train or in concentration camps. So in 1940, the Nazis began deporting, which means sending them away, German Jews to Poland. Now, like we saw, the Jews were forced in the ghettos. The Nazis began the first mass murder of Jews in Poland. Poland was home to one of the most infamous and famous concentration camps known as Auschwitz, and that was a death camp. So if you were heading to Auschwitz, you most likely were going to die at Auschwitz. Several Jews were put into concentration camps. They were either a camp or a death camp. Hitler called for the death of anyone that he or the soldiers themselves would consider to have a disability. That would be the people who are mentally handicapped, if they couldn't walk properly, if they couldn't do many things, if they were dwarfs or midgets, if they were anything like that that he classified as a disability, they were to automatically be excuse me, terminated. Now, this is an image of the Jews leaving a ghetto. Right here, as you can see, they're being marched by the German SS soldiers. And this is an image from the railroad tracks down here, which is heading into Auschwitz. So they knew that if they were heading to Auschwitz after a little bit, they knew that it wasn't a good thing. Now, in 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. That was USSR, Russia. And Germany had an agreement with the USSR that they weren't going to, fight each other or agitate, but Hitler was not going to agree to that. So the Jews throughout Western Europe were forced into ghettos. So whenever the Germans or the Nazi Party took control of an area, they would look for the Jews and they would take them and put them in the ghettos. Jews may not leave their home without permission from the police. Jews may no longer use public telephones. Hitler ordered thousands of Jews to be transported to concentration camps, and these were called work camps. That's what they referred to them as, but some of them were known as death camps. Now, the Jews came they thought that they were going places, so they had packed their bags. And as you can see, their names are actually on the suitcases because they thought, they could get their luggage later. But when they got from the ghettos, they were put into basically cattle carts for transportation, and they were taken to these concentration camps, and all their stuff was put in areas. So you have suitcases that were piled up. You have shoes, thousands of shoes that were piled up. You have eyeglasses, wedding bands by the thousands. And these are images of the concentration camps. You can see they all had to wear a certain type of uniform, which is a striped uniform. Most of them had their head shaved because of lice. So as you can see, it wasn't a camp like most of us know. This was a very bad place. Women, children, and men, all alike, were here. Now, in 1942, the Nazi officials discussed what was known as the final solution, which was their official plan to kill all European Jews. To the government officials, Jews are forbidden to subscribe to newspapers, keep dogs, cats, birds, and etc., keep electric equipment, including typewriters, own bicycles, buy meat, eggs, or milk, use public transportation, and attend school. Once the Jews were at work camp, Nazis began killing them in gas chambers. And what would happen, they would get off the train, and basically you had soldiers that were standing, and they would either point to the right or the left. Everyone that was exiting the train had to either go right or left. What they were doing was that if you went to the right, you were going to get your change clothes, get your head shaved, do all that. If you went to the left, they gave you an opinion that you were going to. I'm sorry, my mother is talking. If you went to the left, they were said, okay, we're just going to go take a shower, we're going to clean up. But actually, they went into these chambers that looked like this on the bottom right, that they assumed were showers, but as soon as they got in there, gas came from the ceiling, and they would um, they would the gas would come down from the ceiling and kill the people in there. And if they say there are, um, like right here, you can see this discoloration. There actually, you can see the fingernail, the claw things, because people were trying to get out of there. So then what they would do is they would take all those bodies, either put them in a mass burial or they would burn them in the crematorium. Now in 1943, so we're about 4 years into the war, about 80 to 85% of the Jews who would die had already died in the Holocaust. They were already murdered. So from 1943 to 1945, when it officially ended, this was a time period where not many Jewish people were being killed. Now, in 1944, Hitler takes over Hungary and begins deporting 12,000 Hungarian Jews each day to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. The Nazis, when the Nazis realized that they were losing the war, they began evacuating these death camps. And why they did that is they didn't want to be caught with all these Jews to be killed. So they went on these death marches where they would march these Jewish people miles and miles in snow cold uh, environments, where most of them, if they didn't keep up, they would just kill them. So they called them death marches because most of the people in these marches they were hoping would die, and several of them did. In 1945, when it became clear that he would not win the war, Hitler committed suicide. And within a few days of his death, the German army surrendered to the Europeans. Now, World War II in Europe ended, and you have concentration camps that were being liberated all over Europe. And these death camps were being emptied, and people were seeing these images, and soldiers were. If you look at interviews of these soldiers, they themselves were extremely impacted by these facilities. And even though when they were free, they couldn't go back home because most of the people, their family members, had died. And some of them, they were the only ones that were left. And when Hitler died, it was big news. You have Time magazine, and then you have the Stars and Stripes when they found Hitler dead in Berlin. Now, this is the liberation of concentration camps. Now, why they didn't just let them go is because they had to get them medically checked, make sure they were healthy, and if they were sick, they went different places. And they didn't let them go because if they did, they would go eat and they would actually die because they ate so much. And as you can see, these were men. And if you look right here, you can actually see his kneecaps. They were starved. You can see right here, they were crammed into these beds. They were starved. You can see their bones. These were women. And then these were still bunks. And these were the bathrooms. Now, from November 20th, 1945 to October 1st, 1946, you have what's called the Nuremberg trials, which was basically trials of humanitarian trials that were committed during the Holocaust. All these people were brought to trial. In Nuremberg, Germany was chosen for the site of the trial to take place in between 1945 and 1946. The judges were all Allied power. There were four, as I said earlier: Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States. They preside over the hearing, where 22 major Nazi criminals were tried. 12 prominent Nazis were sentenced to death, Most of the defendants admitted to their crime of which they were accused, although most claimed that they were simply following the orders of a higher authority, which was Hitler. So this was where the Nuremberg trials took place. And this lady right here is translating what is going on to the person beside her. Okay, here's some more pictures. You have the judges and everything right here. This is Hermann Göring. He was a Nazi officer who did many a bad thing. Now, in 1948, the United Nations established a Jewish homeland in British-controlled Palestine, which became known as the State of Israel in 1948. Now, this was a quick, even though it may not seem quick, it was a quick timeline of the Holocaust. And if I can, we're going to continue with the World War II. We're going to get to where we are towards the end of it. So we'll probably get that tomorrow. Talk to y'all later. Bye.